Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a series review for the Immortals Quartet by Tamora. This is a middle grade and YA fantasy series about a girl who finds out that she has magic that connects her with animals. She finds a teacher who understands her magic, and essentially, over the course of the series, they go on adventures together. The first book in the series is Wild Magic. This is where Dane learns that she has her magical abilities and starts learning how to control them. It's also where she meets a lot of the characters. I give this 5 stars. This is a lovely book. It's so lovely, it's so charming. It is kind of slow. Nothing much really happens in this book. It's more of an introductory novel, which I don't think always works, but it worked here because I feel like everything that was introduced, all her new friends, her backstory, her teacher, her new country, it makes sense and it all flows together very naturally. Tamora Pierce does a really good job with having a larger cast of characters, but everyone just fits together in a very lovely way. They feel like real people going about their lives. And exciting things do happen in this book. It's not a boring book where nothing happens, it just doesn't really have a strong plot line. It's just Dane's character development and Dane figuring out what her magic is. At points there is a bit too much info dumping, and I do think that's something Pierce struggled with a bit in her earlier books, but it didn't bother me too much, and this was just lovely. This is my childhood. There's so many nostalgic feelings for this series, and this first book made me so happy. The second book in the series is Wolfspeaker. In this book, Dane and her teacher Numair uncover a treasonous plot, and Dane is reunited with a wolf pack who saved her life when she was younger. I also gave this book 5 stars. I was kind of surprised by that rating, honestly, because back in the day, this was my least favorite of the series, and this was the only one that I never bothered rereading because I didn't particularly enjoy it. But I wound up really loving it as an adult. I thought it was so well done, possibly even better than the first one. It has a much better plot and storyline, and it actually has really strong character development for Dane. I think the reason I didn't like it as much as a child is because for a lot of this book, Dane is on her own with animals. Numair is essentially the only other main character who exists in this book. Because they are far away from the capital city and all of Dane's friends, I do miss the other characters that aren't around quite as much for this story. But if you're a fan of books that center around animals, there are a lot of different animal characters in this. Dane has a dragon called Kitten. She has a wolf pack that she essentially becomes a member of their pack. There are all kinds of animals, squirrels and birds that she meets in the forest, and because she can talk to them, they have characters of their own, and I think that was really well done. So while I do miss kind of the normal setting of these books and the normal characters, it was a really wonderful departure, and the story in this was so strong. I'd forgotten how much the treasonous plot mattered, and it was a really strong arc. And I do think this is one of the better books in the series, which I wasn't expecting it to be. I thought this might be a 3-star read, but it was wonderfully done. The third book in the series is Emperor Mage. This was always my favorite as a child, and I gave it 5 stars as an adult. This follows Dane and Numair as they go to the Karthak Empire for peace talks with the Emperor, who's been sending raiding ships to Tortal for years. I just adore this book. I think one thing that Tamora Pierce does so incredibly well is the dramatic climax, and this book is the epitome of the dramatic climax. Every moment of this is just incredibly exciting. This is also kind of the heart-wrenching book because there are real consequences for the characters in this, and they are at various points quite afraid for their lives. You also get to see Dane as she's dealing with a traumatic situation on her own, and you see her kind of lose grips with the person she used to be. And I found that really wonderful. I think the character development in this and how much Dane ages in this book really makes it worthwhile. But the dramatic climax of this gets me every time. It's one of the most exciting that I have read in a book. And it's one that just has me like putting it down every few pages because I love it so much that it's just too much for me to bear. This 100% lives up to my childhood. And then we get to book 4, The Realms of the Gods. And I knew this book was going to be kind of a disappointment for me. But I'm going to talk about some other things before I get to the major issue I had with this book, which is kind of like the downer on this entire series. This follows Dane as she goes to the Realms of the Gods and spends a lot of time with the gods. And this was one of my favorites as a kid. I reread it many, many times and loved it. As an adult, Not so much. I gave this book 3 stars, and I honestly don't know if this would have gotten a 3 star rating if I didn't have that nostalgia for this book, because I can't separate the nostalgia and the love for this book that I had as a child with my feelings towards it now. I enjoy a lot of things about this book. I think the way the realms of the gods is explored is really wonderfully done. It's very interesting to learn about the gods firsthand because they have made appearances in Tamora Pierce's other books, but this is one of the only times that you get a really in-depth look at them and their world and how they're characters too. They're essentially just people who live forever. And it's really interesting. The negatives for this book is the first is that it's kind of like a travelogue. There's a huge war going on in the mortal realms, but because Dane is in the realms of the gods, she's not really there for it. She kind of gets dreams and she can see what's happening a bit, but I miss that we didn't get a first-hand experience of the war. There's this dramatic war going on, and Dane is traveling across the realms of the gods in order to hang out with dragons. And that was a little bit boring for me. I just wasn't super interested. I wanted to be down at the war because the war seemed really exciting and there was a lot of drama going on there. And Dane was just sort of like hiking across a desert. It wasn't terrible, but it did bore me a little bit. But the major problem in this book is the romance. And there are hints of this in previous books in the series, but they never actually happen. In this book, the romance happens in full force. And first of all, it is kind of poorly done. It's kind of just like written in. It doesn't really have much to do with the plot. It just kind of happens because romance. And it's a little bit jarring. But the main problem with the romance is that there is a very large age gap. And I knew going in that I was going to be kind of squeamish about that. But I think I'd forgotten quite how wide the age gap was. In my head, Dane was like 18 or 19 and her love interest was like 25. But in the book, Dane is 16 and her love interest is 30. I don't really have anything more to say about that. That's just not okay. And it really sucks because I would love to recommend this series because I think it's a wonderful series. If you can just disregard the fact that the romance is incredibly cringeworthy and just awful. But I know that's kind of unfair to ask people because this is not a particularly old book. It's not like I'm saying, oh, this book was written 100 years ago, so let's not judge it by today's standards. This was written in the 90s. Like, I was alive when this book was written and published. It shouldn't have been okay then. It wasn't okay then. And I really hate that romance just ruins this book because it's entirely unnecessary to the story. If you took out the romance, this would still be the same exact story. And it makes me bitter. It's such a sour note to end this series on. I think Tamora Pierce has improved a lot with her social stances on things like this. Over the years, she's continued writing. There are more problematic social issues with her earlier books, as I've noticed in the Alana series as well. But she's improved on that a lot, which is kind of why I'm still okay reading her as an adult. But this was just too much for me. I couldn't forgive this entirely. And the fact that I gave it 3 stars is almost entirely based on nostalgia, I think. So if you're someone who can read a book and accept that one part of that book is not an okay thing, but kind of get past it, or just accept that it's part of the book, maybe read this series. Maybe just read the first 3 books in the series and skip the last one. I don't know, but it's so disappointing because I do think the rest of this series is really wonderful. Let me know down below if you've read the Immortals Quartet and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.